innovation, ecosystems, whatever we should call it. This is becoming a habit. And I'm happy that it's my daily routine. Yeah, your daily routine and in our monthly routine. So we are very happy to have you here. Lots of new faces, very encouraging. So we see that the world of innovation is becoming very, very large. I'm really honored to host this afternoon Nava Swersky Sofer, who I've been in touch with for some years already in various capacities. And you saw the CV of Nava. It's very, very impressive, so I'm not going to go in each and every detail, but Nava is an entrepreneur, is a technology transfer expert. She's legal, she studied law. She worked in 3 different continents. She studied in 4 other continents, I think. She's a woman of magic. And she's also very, very sociable and a good speaker, as we have known since the last 30 hours. So Nava will speak to us in a minute. But
well, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. We sat here yesterday with a slightly smaller group, and we went around the room and had everyone introduce themselves. I'm afraid if we do that now, it might take a little longer than we have. But what I will ask is, I'll speak for a little while. I welcome questions and comments. Please do introduce yourselves at that point so that at least I know who you are. I can kind of guess, right? The guys in the jeans and the black shirts, you're the entrepreneurs. Guys in the coats and tie, money / corporate, you see, I can kind of map the room. No? Wrong?
Yeah,
Not wrong, right.
This is a global phenomenon.
It's absolutely global, it's completely global, and that's good. It makes it easier for us to figure out what's going on. But at the risk of repeating myself for those, I know there are a few people here who heard me yesterday. I don't think there's anyone here who heard me today, right? I don't know, but
Oh,
okay, sorry, really sorry. Some of this will be repetitive, but you can check and see if I've made any mistakes. I haven't been to Athens in a business capacity for many, many, many years. And so in many respects for me, this is almost like a first visit, because it's certainly the first time that I have come across the innovation, I would say the budding innovation ecosystem in Athens. Tomorrow I'll have a chance to see Thessaloniki, and after tomorrow I'll be a big expert on Greece. But on a serious note, I've had a chance to meet many, many people and talk too much probably, but hear a lot from people on their thinking and where they think things are. And I guess where I come out on all of this is that there's a very interesting system that's beginning to emerge. It is young. I was very pleased to hear when I visited EGG this morning and to have this corroborated by the venture capital gentleman who is somewhere. I don't know where.
The article?
Yeah. Where is
Yanis.
Yanis. Oh, there you are. Who corroborated what I heard this morning, that in 2013-14 there were roughly 80 VC-backed deals, and there were 4 or 5 exits, and that is already the beginning of a system that can grow and become attractive. I think that we all know, and I looked at these players within that system and are already doing that, which is very important. Few words about Israel. Israel today, as you know, is one of the world's leading innovation hubs. In terms of venture capital, we are second to the US. Now, we're second in the sense that the US is $48 billion of investment in venture capital last year, and Israel had $3.4 billion, but it is the second. There's nothing in between. Per capita, however, the numbers are a little different. The US is $150 per capita, Israel is $425 per capita. So that, I think, is an interesting statistic to bear in mind when you look at where we are now. That $3.4 billion was invested in 688 companies in 2014, which is quite a bit higher. Usually we run at about 600 companies a year. Last year was a very good year. a very innovative year. And we have a universe of roughly 5,000 tech companies at any given point in time, because there are plenty of failures as well. So the number's growing a little, but overall it is around, it's 4,500, it's 5,000, that's roughly the number that we have at the moment. 2014 was a very, very good year for our innovation economy, if you will. We saw $15 billion in exits last year, $5 billion in M&A, and $10 billion in IPOs, mostly on NASDAQ, although the largest IPO was on the New York Stock Exchange. And that was surprisingly a university spin-off company by the name of Mobileye that makes driver assist systems. So, you know, these systems that tell you that you're too close to the car in front, side, and so on. A company founded by Professor Amnon Shashua from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I had the honor of running the technology arm of the Hebrew University, so it was one of my portfolio companies, but I can't take any credit for the IPO. They did that on their own. But they raised roughly $1 billion, if you include the green shoe and all, and are today valued at around $10 billion, which is a higher valuation than Israel's largest bank. Okay, let's just put this in perspective. That's a hell of a lot of wealth creation. In fact, they've now announced their two main founders are selling some of their shares, and it's roughly $200 million each. So that's a lot of wealth to create. And I am a big believer in that. I think that the more people succeed and the more money they make, greed is a very, very powerful incentive. And we should all want to succeed. And someone said, you know, the Mercedes the guy has next door. I think that's, again, a very powerful incentive if you see the success of the people next to you and you want to be part of that game. So those are just, you know, some of what's happened in the last year. The other important thing that's been happening, especially in the last year, or 2 years, is that we've seen a significant increase, in fact a doubling, in the number of deals that are larger than $20 million. So funding rounds of more than $20 million, which means that we're seeing more sustainable companies, we're seeing more later stage rounds, because it's really easy to create startups. It's not easy, but, you know, it's relatively easy to create a startup and have that first round of funding and, you know, $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is you put into it. It's a lot more difficult to grow a company over time and to raise the capital. So the doubling as a percentage and the number of deals that's above $20 million is a significant symbol of a maturing system. And I mean maturing in a good way. I don't mean maturing that it's about to die off, but maturing in the sense that it's here to stay. And so that's another thing that we saw last year, not just more deals, but more deals of a bigger size within Israel. Now the sectors are across the board. We have everything. You hear a lot about ICT and applications and so on, because those are kind of, you know, cool technologies that everybody likes to talk about. But there's a fair amount on the medical side. We have some very good companies, especially in medical devices, also in biotech. Cyber now is growing in a very major way. One of those IPOs was CyberArk on NASDAQ. But really we have semiconductors, and we have a pretty good mix. And it changes a little every year, which means that there's a good balance of different industries, which again is a good sign, because it's not going to tank off if there's a problem in one particular industry or another. One of the other important elements, and we had a chance to discuss this with some of the people here over drinks just before, is that today in Israel we have over 300 R&D centers of multinational companies. It reads like a who's who list. In fact, it's like the Fortune 500 of tech, if you will. I have a slide that I show, some of you have seen, that's got all these logos on it. Not all 300, they don't fit on one slide, but there's everyone from Microsoft and Apple and Johnson & Johnson and most recently Dropbox, and really everyone who's anyone. Cisco bought a dozen companies in Israel, and they maintain the R&D centers there. Now these companies, these R&D centers, employ over 50,000 people. Now, if you think of that in a national context, it's not an enormous number. I mean, it's a big number, but it's not, you know, a mind-boggling number. But of course, they have this effect that's much greater than those 50,000 people, because these 50,000 people get trained. Some of them leave and start their own companies. They have contacts. They have networks. They know how the world works. They become a very, very important part of creating and preserving and growing this innovation ecosystem. In the first 6 weeks of this year, 2015, $1.3 billion already in deals. In fact, there's 5 weeks. $1.3 billion in deals. An astounding number when you think of it. Roughly close to 600 million in investments, close to 800 million in acquisitions, including, I mentioned, Dropbox made their first major acquisition in Israel, a company called Cloudon, and are maintaining and establishing and planning to grow that as an R&D facility in Israel, because what they're buying isn't just the technology, but the people and the capabilities. Amazon bought a semiconductor company called Annapurna. Again, they are establishing an R&D center based on that, similar to the way Apple did when they bought PrimeSense, to the way Cisco did with a series of companies and many others. So it looks like 2015 might even be a better year than 2014. We don't know yet, but it certainly got off to a fantastic start. I was telling the ambassador, I was preparing slides for a course that I gave in the business school in Madrid, as it happens, and I wanted to have the most recent numbers. This was the end of January. I sat there and I put in some of the recent deals just to kind of give a flavor, because students love this sort of thing. And as I was writing the slide, the news ticker kept on coming in with more deals. It was hilarious. It was hundreds of dollars more by the next morning, so I had to change my slides. It was this feeling that, you know, it doesn't stop for a moment. And that really, I think, today, because we are established in that way, we have all the big VCs are now in Israel with their own funds. So Sequoia has an Israel fund, and Greylock has an Israel fund, and Excel has an Israel fund, and so on. And they're there not because they like Israel or the weather or the wars, or, you know, but they're there because it's a good source of technology. I was also asked earlier whether it was cheaper to do R&D in Israel. And you know what? It no longer is. It used to be. It's true, it used to be relatively competitively priced. It's okay, but it's not that much cheaper. So they're not coming there for the pricing. They're coming because they can get something that they can't get in other places. And I put all these things in front of you to say, really, that's what one should strive to do. I think, you know, as a European country, you can't compete on price, to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, you know, India will be cheaper, okay? But you can create pockets of excellence in the areas in which you have expertise, and those will then maybe drive the growth of the system, building on what areas of strength you already have in this country. One of the other things that's fairly unique about Israel, certainly unique vis-a-vis Greece, is that a lot of our innovation comes out of the academic institutions. It's not unique that academic institutes should innovate. It is unique that we should know how to turn that into money. And I think you can come in, at least as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome to come in. So what we're looking at here is, again, we've been doing this for over 50 years. Now, I mentioned Mobileye. Mobileye is a university spin-off. It's a hugely successful university spin-off, but it's a university spin-off nonetheless. And in fact, Avon Shashu is still a professor at the Hebrew University. And he still, you know, he still has students. And I think that having someone like that within the university system is very inspiring for his students and for the entire system around him as well. We started doing tech transfer 20 years before the US. Okay, just put that in context. 1959 was the establishment of the first tech transfer outfit in Israel. 1980 was the legislation that enabled that to happen in the United States. Today, we have 2 of the top 10 tech transfer outfits coming out of Israel. We're looking at income to the universities of roughly $500 million a year. Product sales of various products that were first discovered in Israeli academic institutions of roughly $22 billion a year. Again, some of those are now off patent, so they might not pay royalties, but that's the order of magnitude. Many, many successful companies, in fact, entire industries. Israel has a seed industry, you know, seeds for tomatoes and peppers and such things, that is entirely based on academic research and was licensed out of mostly the Hebrew University in that case. Today, most of those companies have been sold to multinationals. They have big centers in Israel, and it's a very successful industry. So that's one example of something that can really come out of that sort of collaboration, and maybe something that can grow here, because you do have some very good academic institutions. So there's something to work with. Maybe just, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, by the way. Everybody's looking very solemn. So having given you this wonderful picture of where things are now, I just want to put this in context. Okay, Israel is 66 years old, soon to turn 67 in May. And when Israel was established in 1948 as a state, there were 600,000 people in a very small area, really small area, in a region that doesn't like us so much. We're not very popular with the neighbors. In a corner of the Middle East with no natural resources, nothing. So, I mean, everybody around us, lots of oil, but we, being innovative and unique, managed to find the one little piece of land that had nothing. Not even water, by the way. Which is remarkable for a country that has developed such great agricultural strengths. And you should know this. The water we use in agriculture, 80% of it is reused. So it's water that's been purified and gone back into agriculture. And most of the water we use in general in Israel is desalinated. Because a sea we have the same sea that you have, and most of our water is desalinated. We simply have very, very little fresh water, only from the Sea of Galilee. So that's where we started out. And what happened as a result of that is quite interesting, because you know, necessity is the mother of invention. And in the case of Israel, when I'm asked to explain how it happened, then the one-word explanation is hardship. And I think you know that. Certainly the entrepreneurs in the room know that. When things are hard, you find ways. Small country, and even then we all live in the same area. It's like, you know, we don't live in the north or the south. We sort of live squashed in the middle. We also, because of the lack of natural resources, developed brain power. We also all have Jewish mothers, right? So brain power is particularly important. Education is key. Lots of doctors and lawyers. We have the highest number of doctors per capita, by the way, in the world. And the highest number of lawyers, I think, period. No, it's not true. But one of the highest numbers of lawyers in the world, really remarkably high number. But again, seriously, you develop those capabilities that you can sort of take with you and do things with. The political and military situation situation has led to the development of a very strong military capacity. And I mean, this is known. It also means that everyone in Israel serves in the military. You know, we have compulsory military service for men and women, and we have all served in the military. I am myself a retired captain of the Israel Defense Forces. And what the military does goes in two different directions, okay? One is the technology. So obviously you develop technology and missile heads and all those other good things and aircraft and so on. And that spills over into civilian applications. So we were talking about aerospace earlier. It's not just the actual applications for the defense industry, but also the use of those technologies. One of the examples that I like in particular is the Pillcam, developed by Given Imaging, incidentally one of the companies that makes up the $5 billion in M&A last year. And that is a pill about the size of a large antibiotic pill, which encapsulates a very tiny camera that was originally developed by Israel's military, by Israel's defense industry for missile heads. It's a camera that sits at the top of the missile head. It's encapsulated inside this capsule, and you swallow it for diagnostic purposes, so it's much easier than prodding with, you know, fiber optics. And that was a combination of the military technology, the capability, the thinking that took that to a medical application, and of course the execution, which, you know, this is a product that's used around the world today, and the company eventually was acquired. Now, so that's one thing, is taking these technologies, developing them, and also the spillover effect. The second thing, though, is the training that we get in the military, both directly technically, okay, so people who are in relevant areas of the military who then go out because they've worked on coding, or they've worked on cybersecurity, or they've worked on various other types of ICT related issues, and they then go out almost as entire teams and start companies based on the knowledge that they've acquired. But the second thing has nothing to do with the military technology. It has to do with the interpersonal and personal skills that you acquire and develop in that sort of environment. Teamwork, leadership, problem solving, relying on other people, you know, working, knowing what you need, which again, for the entrepreneurs in the room, is part of what makes a good startup team. Does it sound to you like a startup team? Because that really is what it is. Thinking outside the box, which is sometimes necessary when you have to overcome some real-life difficult situations. And so, you have these young men and women who come out of the military. Typically then they take maybe a year off. So they go to university age 22, 23. By the time they come out the other end, they've had these life experiences that make them very well suited for entrepreneurial activity. They're also somewhat more focused because they're in their mid-20s, they're not 18, you know, they're in a bit more of a hurry to get on with life. And I think that's another success factor that really derives out of something you never would have thought. Because I don't think anyone would advocate compulsory military service as an element in creating an innovation economy, you know, but it is. Israel is a country of immigrants. We have a large diaspora. You also have a large diaspora. I mean, there are so many Greeks everywhere, you sort of wonder that there are enough Greeks in Greece. It's the same with Israel, you know. I think that there are as many people living abroad as there are in Israel. And yes, I've heard a whole lot about brain drain. We also have brain drain. But sometimes having access to a friendly community abroad can be a good thing. The Jewish diaspora in the US was a very important element in raising those very first venture funds in Israel that I'll talk about in a minute, because there were people who were well placed, who had the capacity to assist and wanted to do something to help. And if they could make money on the way, well, so much the better. And some did, many did. But that wasn't really why they came into this activity in the first place. But having that was an important element in furthering the cause of, you know, innovation. The second thing, though, is it's a country of immigrants, so people do come, okay? And remember 600,000 in 1948? 8 million people today. That's a big population growth. And I always give the example, again, necessity is the mother of invention. 1990, the demise of the Soviet Union, 1990, 1 million immigrants came to Israel, 1 million people. Israel had 5 million inhabitants at the time, so it's a 20% population growth in the space of less than 2 years. They need jobs, they're highly educated, they're engineers, they're scientists, they come from the top schools, mostly in Russia, but also all the other republics. What do? You can't really create another 20% jobs in the workforce. So one of the things that was done was Israel created what is now world famous system of incubators. Now, I remind you, this is 1990. Incubators were in maternity wards in the hospitals. Those were incubators, okay? And what they said was, look, we're going to give these people a little bit of money. They have ideas, and with any luck, they'll create their own jobs. Maybe they'll even create jobs for some other people. And that's how this was started. And in fact, a few years later, there was a very serious discussion about ending the program because there was no longer this big wave of immigration, and why should we have these things? Luckily, they didn't, and this program has morphed into what it is now, which is it's been privatized, and there are some very important players, including many multinationals who've come in. And it's growing now. Again, we were talking earlier about a food-focused incubator. There's a cyber-focused incubator. There's all sorts now that are focused on certain areas and are an important part of this first rang, if you will, of the innovation ecosystem. But that's just one example of how, you know, dealing with hardship, okay, dealing with the challenge has morphed into an important part of this innovation economy. So now we have this innovation economy. Now, along the way, I do have to say something about the government, because everybody's been talking to me about the role of government. I'll say this. I'm a private sector person through and through, okay? I have advised the government, I still advise the government sometimes, but very much from a private sector perspective. But having said that, we have enjoyed some very smart government intervention over the years. Incubators, one example. Another example, we have some very good programs that support the very early stage of technology transfer from academia to industry. Not big amounts of money, but they're there when you need them, when nobody else is willing to put the money. A third and probably best known example is the venture capital industry, which was created by government intervention. Again, I take you back 25 years. There is one venture fund in Israel, $30 million. Doesn't do, you know, much for an economy. And the government comes in with the USMA program, means initiative in Hebrew, and they put $100 million to work. But the way they put that $100 million to work was very smart. It was to create 10 funds in which they put about half the money, a little less. But each of these funds had to have an internationally acknowledged partner, expert, so people like Advent or Oxford Biosciences or the big funds that were at the time. And they had to have a local team put together of people who could learn from the international partners and move this along. So we now ended up with 10 $20 million funds, 10 funds of $20 million each, with local teams that were still learning, but with international partners who could teach them, okay? And off they went, and they did very, very well. They also did well because if you remember what was happening in the markets in the 90s, then they came into the exit phase just as the markets were booming. So they did very, very well, and most of them were able to raise second and third and fourth funds that grew and grew. Well, second and third grew, the fourth were a little more challenging, but you know, the market's booming again, so mostly they're doing well. The government sold out of that. Okay? Once that was established, there's no role for the government in venture capital. And today we have, as you heard, $3.4 billion last year, and it doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. Of course, the new big players are China and, to a much smaller degree, Japan, but mostly China, now making significant investments into Israeli venture capital firms and through them into Israeli technology companies. So there's a bit of a shift from the US, kind of skipped Europe, went east, maybe it went the other way. There is some European money, but it's relatively little. It's mostly American money. And there's actually almost no Israeli money. That's something that we need to rectify. There is almost no Israeli money in that 3.4 billion. We should probably fix that because at the end of the day, the money is flowing back out of the country, but we're creating jobs and we're creating economic growth, so there's a lot of potential for the country as well. So having said all of that, I'm happy to take a break and take some questions, maybe. I mean, I can go on, but I'm happy to take a break and take some questions. Oh, don't be shy.
Nava, can you say a few words about what you have heard and how you see the Greek, we like to use the word ecosystem, in the 30 hours that you have been here? And the next thing, which is more important, what do you think? You don't have to, then nobody's going to come back and tell you you said this and quote you. How do you see the Greek-Israeli partnership in this joint venture?
Well, I think, as I started out by saying, I've seen, and again, it's so partial that I have to be very careful what I say, because maybe I haven't seen what there is to see. But what I've seen is the beginnings of an ecosystem. So there are entrepreneurs. There certainly is the human capital. That's important. There's good education, there's good universities, and so on. There's some capital, not enough, but some capital. It's not totally impossible to get capital, but there should be more. What there doesn't seem to be is any debt funding, so that's going to be a problem later on as the companies grow. But in the very early stages, when they need equity, there seems to be a little bit of that around, although again, maybe not enough. There are actually very few, I think, if any, multinationals that are active here. Well, Microsoft isn't in the right, so they're active here, but that can also grow, I think. And I think that if I saw some very interesting startup ideas today. Again, time will tell who succeeds and who doesn't succeed, but you know, when we walked through the floors at Egg, I said, well, you know, it looks like an incubator. It looks like an incubator anywhere else, and that's a good thing. You know, it doesn't look like a Greek incubator. It just looks like an incubator. And I've seen these all over the world, and that means that you're part of a global system that works in pretty much the same way. So the beginnings are there. What struck me, and I said this a little before, is this: there needs to be, I guess, a greater belief in the ability of the private sector to help itself, and a little bit less of a desire to rely on the government. Because the government should be an enabler. So the government should stay out of your way and provide you with a framework that enables you to do what you need to do. But you know something? You know that we didn't have a law that enables angel investors to get tax credits until less than 3 years ago. So it hasn't stopped us from having a very vibrant innovation system. It was just less attractive maybe, but it was attractive enough for people to put their money in. And in fact, it's not that we've seen such a huge growth since the law was put into effect. There's some growth, and it was important, and it had to happen. By the same token, the same thing was true of investors and venture capital funds. The legal framework that makes that easier for foreign investors to invest in funds that invest in Israel, that was only put into place after the first round of funds. In fact, the second round of funds was already done. Until then, it was less attractive, but it happened anyway. Okay, until we put the legislation in place with, because it's mostly international and it goes through things like Cayman Island structures, we needed legislation to make it simple. But I guess the point is that things can happen even if you don't have the legal framework in place. You don't have to wait for the government to put things in place in order to then start the activity. So that kind of strikes me as being, maybe there's room there to be a little more proactive and to define exactly what you want, because you've got a new government. We don't have a new government. We will soon have a new government. So we're in the same situation then.
The problem is in Greece we don't have a stabilized framework. This is the main problem.
Okay.
Look what happens with taxes. It's a huge problem, and I know that.
What happens with taxes?
They change everything. They change all the time. They change.
The framework is very different.
And are they higher than they are in Israel? Because we have very high taxes.
No.
Okay, so what's the problem?
Yeah,
But we do have a venture capital.
The taxes is not how high they are, but the volatility. So if you are sure that the taxes are going to be whatever, 40 or 50 or 30, if they're going to be there for the next 35 or 40 years, then the investor knows and feels very secure about it, that's going to be there. If every week or every 6 months or every year we change them, then we have a problem because we don't know what's coming within the next quarter or year about this. That's the problem with the taxes.
I understand
around
that.
the world.
No, I understand that, and since I spent most of my career in venture capital, I certainly appreciate that. But I guess what I'm saying is this. I'm not belittling the role of the government. I think the government has an important role in creating the enabling framework. I am simply saying that a lot of what I've heard, once you drill down into the points that were made, there is plenty of room for the private sector to make progress without waiting for the government to put the framework in place first. And I know from our own experience that it happens. I mean, it's not the US. The US, they have the structures and the framework and they make changes, and sometimes the changes they make are not so easy to deal with. I was living and working in the US when Sarbanes-Oxley came into effect. It was a disaster. I mean, today we live with it because we know it was a disaster. I was on all these boards and all we ever did was spend time, wondering how the hell we were going to comply with this. So, even in the big United States of America. But certainly in the Israeli example, which is much more relevant for Greece, okay, a lot of the things that happen just, we get on with it, okay? We make things happen. I'll tell you something, if we waited for the political situation to stabilize, peace in the Middle East, I don't have to finish the sentence. So, and again, there's actually one very interesting factor in Israel. If you look, there is no correlation between the political situation and the success of the technology sector or the innovation sector in general. Absolutely no correlation. We have wars and it's booming. Look, 2014, we spent the entire summer running in and out of bomb shelters. And I live in Tel Aviv, I don't live on the border. Okay? Record year. Why? Because in the end of the day, we are very connected to the global economy and the world. And also we've learned to deal with, you're talking about uncertainty? I mean, more uncertain than your tax rate.
Volatility. It's not the same.
I'd kind of like to be alive the next day, you know, that would be nice. But, okay, but jokes aside, when your key people are called into the military, because you might not be aware of this, but we don't end our military service after those 3 or 4 or 5 or 9 years. Okay, you serve in the reserves for 30 to 60 days a year, up to the age of 40 or 51 if you happen to be a pilot, by the way, 1 day every week. So in their case. So when there's a war, as there was in the summer, companies had some serious trouble because if they had, especially the young people, because the entrepreneurs, you know, they're young, they have their military roles, they're called in, what do? It's not Microsoft, it's a company that has 10 people. If a few key people are called in, well, you're in trouble, so you deal with the trouble. It's very unexpected, but you deal with it. The point is simply, there's plenty of uncertainty, but because the system today is strong enough, we can deal with it and the world can deal with it. We didn't see a drop in investment. The entire summer, while all this was going on, and it wasn't fun, but we didn't see a drop in investment. You know, other than what is just seasonal, because July and August, well, you know, it's July and August everywhere, but because the system is strong enough today and recognized as an important innovation hub, and we can deal with these things which are, I think, a lot more damaging than, you know, some economic uncertainties. So I guess the point there is only that you have more power than you think sometimes to make things happen. That's the one thing, and the other thing is just meeting with different groups is there seems to be maybe less coordination, collaboration, networking than there could be. And there's a great power, especially since the numbers are not huge, you know, the ecosystem is young. There's great power in networking, in getting together, in acting together. Someone said to me yesterday, we don't know how to lean on each other, each person wants to do it alone. It doesn't work alone. And of course you know that, but I think that there is, you know, there are associations and such, but there is power in collaborating, and that can also be very powerful in bringing on the changes that you're looking for in legislation and in frameworks. So that's just another point that strikes me. Again, with the caveat that it's based on 30 hours of many intensive meetings, but you know, I could be wrong, maybe I didn't see the right things, but those are a couple of the points that I saw. Second half of the question, collaboration, a lot of interesting ideas have come up yesterday and today, and we'll work through them together with the ambassador and her team and try and find ways to make them happen. But they range from having mentors come from Israel and finding ways to work with local companies to you can't bring VCs here because Israeli VCs raise money to invest in Israel and Israel-related companies. Okay, that's the premise. They tell this wonderful story that I've just told you, and you know, that's what the money is for. So they're not going to make an investment in a purely Greek company, unless there's some sort of Israel-related something and you can build an argument. But angel investors, on the other hand, may, because they make their own decisions and it's their own money, and maybe they'll find it interesting to do something here, and they can then find the collaborative opportunities. So I'm going to try and help bring some angel groups over to take a look at some of the companies and see if we can't make something happen there. It's the second point. The third point that has come up is the idea of bringing some of the startups to Israel on a visit to create some networking opportunities. We have a couple of very good events that let them be exposed to the ecosystem and to potential investors and collaborators. So that's another thing. Another thing that has come up is, of course, there is the we are members of the European Framework Programs and now Horizon 2020, but we also have a binational agreement between Israel and Greece, so companies can work with each other, one-on-one, not, you don't have to have the whole consortium framework. So there's a call coming up now, that's another element. Another point that has come up that we'll follow up on is specifically in the academic commercialization and tech transfer, maybe And here it's really sort of consulting and helping in setting up the systems here, because most of the universities don't seem to have them, or they have very little, and that will be following up on partly myself, because one of my areas of expertise. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities here. Sure, we'd like to see bigger companies collaborating and finding ways to work together, but look, it's very close, hey? It's less than 2 hours. We're in the same time zone. There are a number of people here in the room who split their time between Israel and Greece. It's quite doable. Not that I'm advocating that you do that. I'm just simply saying it's easy to collaborate. And we should be able to find greater ways to work together. But the average Israeli, when you ask them what they know about Greece, it's islands and tourism and olive oil and feta cheese. And
good music.
Music, yeah, we like the music. We do like the music. I have that disc, you know, he sent me the disc. The Greek ambassador, he sent me the disc, I listen to it all the time. The Greek ambassador held a farewell dinner for the Israeli ambassador when she came here, and he had a wonderful soundtrack playing in the background, and it turned out that he put it together himself, of Greek music, and he very kindly sent me a disc, so I now have
the IP. He sold you the IP.
He didn't sell me the IP. He gave me a copy to use. I have a license.
Hi, my name is Michalis. I'm the founder of Forky. It's a new food service that we bring great food in 10 minutes. Just to introduce myself. My question is, let's say you're the advisor of the Greek government. What would you tell them to do now? Like 3 main pillars that should work on immediately.
Well, here I'm going to be very careful because I don't know enough, okay? I know more today than I knew yesterday, but it's only one more day. I was told today, and again I don't know the facts, but I was told today that there is a great issue with bankruptcy here, that if you go bankrupt, basically that it's that there's a good reason why Greeks have the highest rate of fear of failure in the European Union. And if that is indeed the case, then that needs to be changed, because people need to be able to fail. Okay? We didn't talk about failure here, but that's obviously a very important part of innovating and taking risks, is that, well, you know, you will fail. Not you, but, you know, the system. Within the system, people will fail.
All the success.
So I guess that would be the first thing. The second thing is I would look into specific initiatives to fill the gaps in the system, but you know, the most obvious gaps in the system, okay? And maybe that's because we have a sort of R&D, national R&D agency that has various programs to support academia industry collaborations, to give some very early stage funding. You can get really small grants that will enable you to write a patent, okay? To submit your initial patent application, to start your company, because at that stage no one's going to invest in you, so you can get access to that money. You have sort of that very early stage funding, which is not a lot of money, but it makes a very big difference to the make or break of whether or not you're going to start a company. So I would explore, I'd say, a menu of the most important initiatives. And really the cost, the monetary cost is negligible compared with the outside. So that would be another thing that I would look into. And then the third is that you do have to provide a stable environment. So if you've got volatility in these areas, that has to stop, because it's very hard to explain that. If there was a fourth point, then I would look into the possibility of encouraging multinationals to come and establish R&D centers here. And again, we discussed this just before. Yes, companies come to Israel now because they want to be there and they acquire companies and maintain those as R&D centers. But if you go back to some of the famous examples, most notably Intel, in Israel, Intel has 2 fabs, but they've received some very, very big tax and other breaks from the state. And you're looking at a cost of about $600 million because we competed with other countries that were willing to give them those sorts of breaks. You know, again, in the case of Intel, it was Ireland, mostly. There were some others. So I think the understanding that having multinationals come in doesn't increase the brain drain, but on the other hand, on the contrary, it creates opportunity. I think that can also, I think.
I want to ask for venture capitals from your experience at the phase of scale-up. What an entrepreneur should have to raise more money from venture capitals or equity capitals? Should, for example, he should have an exit plan? Because capitals put their money, get more money back?
No. The answer is no. I mean, no VC is looking specifically for an exit plan. If they know their job, then they know where the exit is going to come from. And you don't build a company for an exit, you just build the best company you can. And if it really is good, someone's going to come along and something good will happen. Either it'll get quiet or it will go public when it needs to, you know. I think that's important. But at the same time, I think that, you know, what you look at mostly, and it's the same everywhere, globally. You want to have a team that you believe in and that you believe can execute the business plan, okay? You want to have a plan that makes sense. You want to have, and I hate this term, I only hate it because everybody uses it now, but I'm going to use it myself, disruptive technology. Have you heard that recently? Everybody talks about disruptive technology. But basically something that's exciting, that's unique, that's going to make a real difference within the area that you're in. You want to know that they understand and can access their market. And all of those things, again, you look at any startup, it can be in Athens or in Tel Aviv or in Silicon Valley. It all, because the world is global. It's entirely global. Some things are more suitable for venture investing. Excuse me, some things are less suitable. You know, some of the service plays are less suitable for venture investing. It's not obvious how you're going to find your way out of that with a significant return. But on the whole, if you have a good product and a good plan and a good team, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be attractive to a good VC. I don't know if you agree, but to me, that's... I didn't change the way I viewed investments when I moved from Silicon Valley to Israel. The offerings were different. They were different. But because in the end I was looking at the global markets and I was looking at the same players for potential collaborations and financial deals, so you know, I had to have the same ingredients. They didn't change.
Okay, but there is a difference in the approach between Silicon Valley and Israel, for example. In the way venture capital find the startups. Because many startups or business try to find the venture capitals from the sky. It's not very easy.
Why do you think
how we can bring the investors more close to the entrepreneurs?
Well, I think that goes back to the point on networking that I made before. And I really do think that if you already have some VCs, you don't have many, but you have some VCs, you know, there are meetups in Tel Aviv every day, several of them. All sorts of meetups of all sorts of groups looking at all sorts of different things, and once it will be e-health, and once it will be, I don't know, wearable electronics, and once it will be, God knows, and different groups arrange them, and some of them are 20 people, and some of them are 200 people, but you talk to each other all the time, you know? It's a community. You need to know what's going on. And I don't know, I guess I was told that that's not quite the case here, and if it isn't, then that's something that you can change. I mean, the people in this room can change it. And it doesn't have to be fancy, you can get together for pizza and beer at the end of the day, but you should get together, because there's tremendous value in exchanging these things. I think I want to say one more thing and then take some more questions. I think there's a very good opportunity now. Because, you know, I always talk about this innovation recipe, okay? Where you have to have the infrastructure in place, you have to have the resources, but mostly you have to have the culture for innovation. And the single most important element of an innovation culture is an appetite for failure, or at least the acceptance of failure as an unavoidable part of the system. Now, I was very distressed yesterday to hear that Greece has this highest rate of fear of failure, and then I was told that it was partly because of the actual cost in terms of the ability to do business again. But I also think that being in the midst of an ongoing economic crisis is a good thing when it comes to accepting failure, because the cost of failure has never been lower. And when you think of it that way, it's very similar to the hardships that I was describing before. You do things because you do them because, well, you're not going to lose out on a comfortable government job or, you know, some long-term corporate opportunity because it just isn't there at the moment, okay? And you can look at the example of Spain. Spain with 50% unemployment among the young people. You're seeing an increase now in entrepreneurial activity because they've got nothing to lose. So they're starting companies. And as a result of that, the government has also started some programs, you know, funding, and they even have a program that lets you bring in people. So if an entrepreneur wants to come in and start a company, they can get a visa and some funding for 2 years and so on, because they want companies to come in and start. So, so I think that looking at this current point in time as an opportunity, sort of really making that shift, accepting that, you know, not much will happen if you don't succeed because you're not missing out on something else. I think that's a good opportunity. Comments? Questions? Yes.
Well, what would you believe that would be the best way to work on the micro level? For example, my name is Alex, and I come from a Greek corporate, and I run a corporate business incubator, I would say. So we've invested some money, not much, 100K, along with Nikos here, who's from a Greek seed fund, on a Greek company who does bioinformatics. Okay, and they also come out from a Greek R&D center, and the Greek R&D center has the 10% of the company, which was an ad hoc deal that we did, which is also kind of interesting. So the guy knew that, learned that I was coming here today and said, okay, I'm on this sector and I'm looking for customers, not investors. You know, I can find investors from Greece here, for example. Nikos can do follow-up up to $1 million, so he's covered for the next year, for example. But I like to have, you know, to find customers from Israel. I know some customers in Europe.
Very easy. Tell him that in May there's a very large conference in Tel Aviv. It's called Biomed. There are 5,000 people, 6,000 people there. It's a very good opportunity to come and meet with everyone. However, tell him also that if he doesn't do his homework before he comes, he'll be wasting the cost of his airfare. No, seriously, sorry, I'm involved in some of these very big events. And they're wonderful, but they're only wonderful if you do your homework. However, if you do your homework and you find out you use the B2B engines and, you know, all of that good stuff, then everyone's in the same place for a couple of days, two days or 3 days. And it's a very good opportunity to meet with all the players in the field. Not just from Israel, by the way. Israel can be an interesting hub to meet people from other countries because we have this reputation. Everybody comes. So last year I met a Danish company and they told me with great excitement that their biggest client was through coming to, in fact, this conference in Israel a couple of years before, and they met, I don't even remember where the client is from, US, UK, somewhere else, but they met in Israel at this conference. Well, there's a big exhibition actually, so you know, opportunity. But that, for example, is one idea, just because you said bioinformatics, so that seems to be
What is
right
the name
area.
of the conference?
It's called Biomed.
Biomed.
And I'm sure the embassy can give you the details. But again, these types of big conferences and events are very, very useful if you know how to use them. Okay, they can be very useful if you know how to use them, and you go, you set up meetings, you use the opportunity of having everyone in the same place to create these contacts. And we have a few of these. We were talking today about the DLD. Some of you might be familiar with this DLD in Germany, but there's one in Israel in September, which again is all cool digital and other technologies. And it's great fun. But if you actually want to come out of it with some significant contacts, then you have to do homework and, you know, make sure that you meet all the right people. So, but that's always true, not just in Israel. So that I think
And
is
there's an Israeli entrepreneur here.
right.
Who did?
Yeah, we know,
Hi.
we met last week. I was here with a colleague of mine, old friend, Rani Cohen, that he's coming from the high-tech, from the IT sector. And he's within the startup industry in Israel from the very beginning stage, as Nava described, from the early 90s. Actually, with INOS, actually, so I think Nava is right. The conference, the Biomed, which will be this year on the end of May, if I'm not wrong.
I think so.
First of all, they have the system in place that you can book, that you can, once you register, you can see all the people that will attend, and you can book the meetings in advance. They have this nice arrangement in place. Second, I think it's also, if for such a company like EOS, it's to have somebody, I think Nava or her colleagues, I can also assist to come to 2 days or 3 days, to have in advance organized meetings, because we have in Israel, I mentioned to you, some good bioinformative companies. One of them is Compugen. Compugen is one of the first IPOs.
They're now more into the lead generation, but we can discuss more of this later, but I fully agree with Udi, and Rani is a mutual friend. We all know each other, eh? 1 degree of separation in Israel. But I agree with you that they have their own engine, which is very useful, and maybe also getting help from someone in addition to that to set things up is a good idea. But yeah, I think that would be interesting, not just to find customers in Israel, to find customers in different places, and maybe even access to other collaborative opportunities. So yeah, we do have some very good companies. And, yeah.
How can we get closer to the Israeli angel investors? Is there like a network, official network?
Well, there is, but like anything else, especially with angels, you need you don't need, but it's very helpful if you have a personal contact. Because they are inundated with opportunities and requests, and they're only likely to look at something if there's a reason for it, much like VCs, although not that any VC would admit to it. Right? Well, the truth is, you look at the things that are closer to you. I think that one thing to consider, if you seriously think that you'd like to have investors from Israel, is coming to Israel. And coming to Israel maybe for one of these conferences that's in your area, simply because it's a good meeting point and everybody goes there. And then you also have the ability to say, okay, I'm coming to Israel, I'll be there on these dates, can I meet with you? Even outside of the conference. I'm pretty sure that DLD also has a meeting engine, I think. And we're talking about maybe having some sort of a group come over, and maybe having some sort of a Greek event. Other countries do, and why not? And I'm sure your ambassador would be happy to help with that as well. And then that gives you the opportunity to get close to people. I can't say anything at this point, but I certainly will approach 1 or 2 groups that I know, and if there's any interest, then happy to follow up through the embassy. Nelly is the commercial attaché, and through the contacts with Foundry and others. Now you know everything.
I have a question. My name is Nikos Antoniou. I'm an investment manager with one of the VCs here, ICT VC at seed stage. So we're at the very early level of investment here, and something that basically was created in 2012 with 4 other VCs. My question is, when it comes to commercialization of these startups in Israel, what paths do they usually use? I mean, do they commercialize inside Israel, because you have so many other corporates there, either American corporates or you have presence there of big corporate clients, or they just shoot for the globe, they shoot for certain markets? I mean, it depends on the case, I agree, but...
Okay, it depends, but I'll make a general comment.
Yeah.
That is actually very important. Because of the isolation, okay, we developed not just military power, but also an international outlook. We don't have a local market. The local market is negligible. Yeah, it's a small country. So Israeli companies are born global. They really are born global. They operate in English. The documentation is entirely in English. We communicate with each other by email in English. We speak Hebrew, of course, you know, we speak Hebrew, but everything in writing can easily be forwarded to Microsoft or to anyone who's interested. Unlike the answer I got today when I asked if they wanted my help in doing something, and I said, can you send me the documents from last year? And they said, oh, but it's in Greek. Well, problem, don't read Greek. So that's one aspect, is this global outlook. Now, within the globe, no, you don't shoot globally. You shoot for a particular market that's relevant to your type of product or offering. Now then, we always sit down and we have this discussion. What should the first market be? Maybe it's the US, maybe it's in Europe, maybe it's in Asia. How do we go about it, and so on. But it's always not do we go international, but where do we go? Or where do we go first? You are in Europe. I mean, there are 300 million people on your doorstep. It should be very easy. And yet, that's not quite there yet. Again, an impression. I do apologize to everyone in the room who has a different opinion, but the little that I've heard, I haven't even heard we're part of Europe, we have a market, we can access, you have no customs, you have no nothing. You know, I was trying to order something online, glasses frame. Because I'm in Israel, it's not within Europe, and they have to ship, and there's this, and there's that, and there's tax, and there's what, and in the end it's not worthwhile, because it ends up being so complicated and so expensive. Now you don't have none of that. You're within the European Union, use it.
It's still so fragmented.
No.
I mean,
yes, it's fragmented, but it's...
Culturally and...
Yes, all of that is true, but you have no idea how difficult it is when you're not within it. Okay? I can tell you, because we're not. Everything is difficult. I was trying to get Israeli wine for a reception in Spain 2 weeks ago at the biggest European nano conference. Anyway, wanted Israeli wine because Israel was the invited country, and I had a big delegation, and I thought it'd be nice when we had this reception that the wine should be Israeli. Okay. Also because one of the leading professors in the field has a winery, and so we were trying to get his wine. Anyway, very long story, not interesting. Net result, we had Israeli wine, but something that was already available in Spain, because it was impossible to get this stuff into Europe within the time frame that we had, because it wasn't already being exported there, okay, exported to other places. So what I'm saying is, yes, it's difficult, it's fragmented, and the languages are different, and the cultures are different, but it's a hell of a lot easier than when you're outside of the Union, okay? Well, this you have to take my word for it. A hell of a lot easier. And so it's a start. Maybe it's not. Maybe your market is somewhere else. I don't know for a particular company. But I do know that you need to have a very serious discussion of this right at the outset. You need to know what your markets are. And you need to know what the order is in which you're going to approach them, because you can't approach them all. If you're making seed investments, these are real early stage startups. They can't go after the world. They have to be fairly targeted. Maybe even not regional. Maybe it's even, you know, certain countries.
Yeah. Another question I have, Nava, is what's the composition of the initial team in a Israeli startup? What type of people do you have in a team?
I think it's fairly international in that, you know, there'll usually be technical people, a couple, because they talk to each other, nobody else understands.
Yep.
And then there'll usually be someone who's more maybe business oriented. He or she can also be a technical person, but there's usually always someone who talks to the outside world, right?
You can communicate.
And that's kind of how it starts. It's the same everywhere. I mean, I can't tell you that I've observed anything particularly different in Israel than I have in other places, only maybe with the caveat that a large number of these teams come out, if they do come out of the military, then they've worked together before. So one of the most famous examples is Checkpoint Technology Software, which invented the firewalls. And they were three guys who had worked together before. And so they sort of, the same three guys moved out and, you know, developed this and went on. One of them still runs the company to this day. So we do have a number of those teams, but even within those teams, you will usually find there's maybe 3 or 4 guys, mostly guys, unfortunately, fewer girls than you'd like to see, and again, predominantly technical and someone who can actually speak in a manner that the world can understand. So they're the foreign minister.
Okay. Thank you.
May I say something?
Sure.
I represent the Greek-Israeli Chamber of Commerce. I would just like to announce it here. We are a small Chamber of Commerce, and we work, and our scope is to collaborate with the guidance and the rules that the embassy will put, let's put it this way. We see our role as a helping role for the Greek entrepreneurs or start-uppers, either to give information as much as we can. We don't know everything, but we could eventually help you to find some contacts in the Israeli entity. We don't have all the knowledge and the know-how, but we have the will, and we can do part of the work that you cannot do alone in the internet or through the existing channels that you have already. Anyway, I want to emphasize that our purpose, there is a Chamber of Commerce, it's good for the relation of the two countries. We did it in other fields in the past, and we definitely hope that we will be of assistance for everybody that would like to ask our help.
Julian, are you organizing this delegation to go to Agritech?
With this occasion, I would like to announce to the people that maybe you don't know it, 27 to 29 of April.
28 to 30.
28 to 30, sorry. At the end of this month, there is a major Agritech exhibition in Israel, for those that don't know and are in the field. It is high-tech, it involves a lot of new technology as well as knowledge of how to deal. And of course, please remember that Greece and Israel has a lot of similarities, in many things, like Nava very well pointed out. Diaspora, same temperamento, same way to see the families.
Same time zone.
Same time zone.
I travel every week. I keep on saying this. Same time zone, huge plus.
And, of course, the same way of seeing the family, eating the same food, sharing the same seas. I mean, even if we go even deeper, Israel and Greece doesn't have the resources that eventually the Arabs or other countries that have minerals could take advantage of. So we need to use our minds. Very correctly said today and yesterday in the conference. If you do use the resources that come from university, that come from thinking together, sharing together, not thinking, this is mine, I will not share the information because 1 + 1 makes more than 3 sometimes. I think you can get multiple advantage. Also, don't forget that Israel thinks global, and they have a lot of experiences, even in the question that you asked before, the CPAs, for example. If a company is lucky enough to be big enough quickly, you need also the mechanism, which is already experienced in Israel, how to use a correct CPA to go to NASDAQ. Why not? Why should you limit yourself to a small? Israel is a small country, but you see today companies in Israel companies that are in Angola, in Kazakhstan before everybody, in Cuba before anyone was thinking that the Cuban fruit would be dealt by the Israeli people. So think big, ask us, we are here to help you, and if we can, we will do it with the best wish we can provide.
I want to add to that, see where you are, but we spoke about food before. It's worth looking into agri-tech for that as well, because there's a lot that's relevant to food technology and development of food. I think it was Harris who was talking about food.
Nava Food Tech, actually in parallel to AgriTech, there is a one-day conference of Food Tech.
Yeah, but I think it's at the same time, that's my point.
Yeah, but it's in separate place, but there will be there a lot of VCs activities, because Food Tech is becoming also a growing area, a hot area.
No, just because we discussed this before, I don't see him now.
Harris,
But anyway, so just food is also a relevant point under this agri-tech umbrella. And agri-tech, by the way, is only once in 3 years. So if you think you can go next year, you can't. If you're at all in this area, it's worth making an effort to be there this year. It's a very big event, very big exhibition, and many, many, many participants from abroad, because Israel's kind of well known for its agricultural technology, so it draws a lot of people.
Thank you, Nava. You've been so great. We are here if anybody wishes to make a follow-up, suggestions, ideas, and we are very happy to have you here. And this is a great excitement for us at the embassy here to be able to interconnect with this, how did you say, tech scene, innovation scene, and have a happy Easter, happy holidays to all of you. And we hope to see you soon.
Can I say one more word before everyone gets up? For those of you who wish to be in contact, because I don't have I don't think I even have enough cards on me, but my email is nava@swersky.com. You have my name, nava@swersky.com. Feel free, I do answer. It can take me some time, but I do answer, and I'd be happy to hear from everyone, especially from those of you who might be coming to Israel for any of the reasons that we've mentioned before. So it would be my great pleasure. And thank you, happy Easter, happy Passover.
Thank you.